Hi. Today I want to talk to you about a really important topic that desperately needs to be addressed, but just seems to float out there in the social media gossip mill and never really gets looked at fairly. And that is the abuse of adult women by men in positions of power. Is this considered abuse or an affair? That's what I want to look at today. An affair happens when two adults freely choose to pursue an emotional and/or sexual relationship outside of their marriages. The key word here is freely. In order to make a choice freely, there can be no extraneous conditions putting pressure on either person. In this scenario, the relationship that I'm going to be describing is going to be a young woman who seeks help or counsel from an older male therapist and religious leader. At first glance, we might think two adults, it has to be an affair. But wait. Duress refers to the act of using threats or psychological pressure to force someone to behave in a way that is contrary to their wishes. We can all agree that this would negate a freely chosen affair. So let's look a little bit closer. Number one, is one of the people in the relationship in a position of power over the other? Certainly, a therapist wields a great deal of power over a client and a pastor over a congregant. Are we not taught since early childhood to obey people in positions of authority? Milgram, a famous psychologist, coined this inclination the authority bias, the tendency that we humans have to blindly follow people who we perceive are in positions of power. His study found that we do this either out of fear or out of a desire to appear cooperative, even when acting against our own better judgment and desires. So back to the relationship. We're just getting started, and already we have an issue with this woman being able to freely choose to engage in a relationship with her therapist and pastor. Number two, is there any childhood abuse in the woman's history that would prohibit her from saying no? Childhood sexual abuse teaches its victims that they don't have the right to say no. If 1 in 4 women are abused, it's safe to say that a large percentage of women seeking counseling have abuse in their backgrounds. In a study by Pope and Vetter, they looked at 1,000 patients who were sexually involved with their therapists. 1/3 of those patients had childhood sexual abuse in their backgrounds. So these women cannot say yes to a relationship with their therapist because no is off the table for them already. Number three, is there a large age gap between the two parties, which could easily confuse or entice the young woman to crave not the person themselves, but the role they are playing? Male therapists and/or pastors naturally take on a paternal role. If this woman has suffered abuse by, say, her father as a child, that will leave an extreme void that is going to make her vulnerable in relationships with older men. Number four, as a young person seeking help from a pastor and/or mental health professional, is that person in an emotionally volatile or fragile state? I would suggest she is, because the relationship originated with her seeking help of some kind. To find much needed support and then risk losing it would be a powerful motivator to want to please the one in power. 5, if the counselor is a pastor or religious leader, as mine was, isn't the woman likely to view him as a representative of God? She may think he is acting on God's behalf, so she can't accurately assess his actions. To criticize the religious leader would feel like criticizing God himself. 6, will saying no to the other person result in any kind of negative consequences? In the therapy setting, would saying no result in anger or the removal of love and affection by the therapist? In an employer-employee setting, will no result in any form of backlash at work? If there's any risk involved in saying no, yes does not apply. 7, is there a dual relationship? If the woman decides to say no, is she at risk of losing him as therapist or pastor? I would suggest that she would feel an extreme amount of pressure if presented with this choice. I would also suggest that she would lose her therapist or pastor if she went against his wishes. 8. Another way you know that the relationship is not one of two equals is this. Can you separate the person from the position? In a regular relationship with equal power, you can. However, once someone acts as your therapist or your pastor or your physician, once they have played one of these particular roles, you will forever view them through that lens. It doesn't matter if the therapist changes jobs to pursue an ex-patient. That patient will always regard them to some degree as their therapist. It just doesn't work. 9. Is there any guilt involved in the woman's decision to stay or leave? In a regular balanced relationship, there's supposed to be a give and take. If your therapist, however, buys you a gift or gives you longer sessions than other clients, it will trigger an insane amount of indebtedness in the client. And that sense of being indebted will definitely play a role when the woman is asked to do something she has reservations about down the road. 10. The same thing goes for pity. If your pastor breaches professional boundaries and begins sharing hurts from his childhood with the woman he is supposed to be counseling, she will feel an extreme amount of empathy and or pity for him, more so than she would in a healthy relationship between equals. Why? Because the pastor is supposed to be the strong one holding it together for the parishioner. The therapist is supposed to be the rock, allowing the client to fall apart without concern for the therapist. I assure you the woman will feel this as psychological pressure. A pastor and a therapist know this. They are trained to maintain boundaries, and they know they are harming the patient when they breach those boundaries. 11. Lastly, a mutual affair between two well-adjusted, healthy adults with no imbalance of power between them will be honest and transparent. The woman sees the man for who he is and willingly chooses him, and vice versa. On the other hand, predators use trickery and deceit. They will create the illusion of whatever the victim needs by first seeking out their voids and then magically fulfilling them. In this way, they foster an extreme dependency on them, just like a victim being given a taste of a drug. Some bait their victims with romantic gestures, others lure them in with a powerful father-daughter dynamic, and others use God. They tell their victims that they have a special relationship, a unique relationship, one that God is blessing. Once the woman is duly addicted to whatever drug of choice the perpetrator is offering, he can begin to up the ante. The woman at this stage may think she is saying yes, but she is not saying yes to the relationship. She is saying yes to the deep-seated need that is being met, to the drug of choice that the abuser is offering. She is likely unaware this is even happening. She simply feels better, like maybe the counseling is helping or maybe the relationship is benefiting her. Regardless of how this type of predator seduces their victims, and regardless of how the women see their role, they never got to freely choose the relationship. They were tricked into it, and that is far from a free choice. Words carry power, so please hesitate the next time you begin to make a judgment on a woman in this position. If the factors above were involved, even one of them, it was not an affair. Name it for what it was, an abuse of power. Thank you.